After nearly 10 years of explaining Star Wars online, I've come across the same questions again and again. Today I'm going to try to answer as many of them as I can in one fell swoop. Here are the 40 most frequently asked questions about The Last Jedi answered.
A single light fighter.
Where was Black Squadron in Episode 8? We were introduced to pilots like Snap Wexley and Jess Pava in The Force Awakens, and they're nowhere to be seen in The Last Jedi. The Poe Dameron comics by Charles Soule revealed that they were sent on a mission to help recruit allies in the fight against the First Order. It didn't go great, and Poe actually had to head out to rescue them all from First Order sympathizers after the Battle of Crait. Of course, this was all figured out after the release of The Last Jedi, so why not just include them in the movie? I'm guessing here, but I think it's because Rian Johnson knew he was going to be killing off most of the Starfighter pilots pretty early in the film. Maybe he wanted to spare all those characters so they could have a chance to come back in Episode 9.
Bombers, keep that tight formation. Fighters, protect the bombers.
Who was Tali Lintra? Like many heroic pilots of Star Wars, Blue Leader has gained a fan following despite having very little screen time. Tali grew up on a farm on the planet Pip-Pip 3, learning how to fly in a classic A-Wing fighter that her family used as a crop duster. She joined the Resistance after seeing the New Republic's lackluster response to the growing threat of the First Order. Her piloting skills impressed Poe Dameron, so she was granted the rank of lieutenant and the call sign Blue Leader. Unfortunately, there aren't many stories about her outside of The Last Jedi, at least not yet.
Captain, Resistance bombers approaching.
Where were the Resistance bombers in the Battle of Starkiller Base? The real answer is that the ships hadn't been created yet, but the book Cobalt Squadron does give us an in-universe answer. Days before the events of The Force Awakens, the Resistance heard of First Order activity in the Atera system. The people there were suffering under First Order rule, and so the bombers of both Cobalt and Crimson Squadrons were sent on a mercy mission. Instead of bombs, they were loaded up with water, food, and other supplies that they dropped to the civilians before retreating. Their mission lasted several days, and while they were gone, the First Order unleashed Starkiller Base on the Hosnian system, and the Resistance was forced to destroy the superweapon without the aid of their bombers. Even if they were at the battle, their very slow speed probably would have made them a liability anyway. Why didn't the Resistance use Y-Wings to attack the First Order dreadnought? They're bombers too. I think it comes down to the size of the bomber's payload. According to Star Wars Legends sources, one Y-Wing could carry up to 20 proton bombs. One MG-100 Star Fortress carried 1,048 proton bombs, so one Resistance bomber was the equivalent of over 50 Y-Wings. Of course, the trade-off is that the bombers were much slower, and Y-Wings already weren't known for their speed. Regardless, a single Resistance bomber packed enough punch to destroy an entire dreadnought. Also, the simple fact that we don't see any Y-Wings in the movie suggests to me that the Resistance didn't have any. Their ships were mostly hand-me-downs from the New Republic. Their X-Wings were an older model, the Raddus was scheduled for retirement before the Resistance took it. I guess nobody had volunteered to give up any Y-Wings until a year later when we saw them in The Rise of Skywalker. How can bombs fall in space? I don't understand why this gets asked so much when we first saw it in The Empire Strikes Back in 1980, but also the Resistance bombers follow the basic rules of physics. It's established that there is a gravity generator in the ship, so when the bombs are released, they are affected by it, and then they fall out of the magnetic field and continue along their given path through space until they hit the First Order dreadnought. That's how it should work.
Go away!
Why was Luke wearing Jedi robes when he first met Rey? Why was he just hanging out on a cliff dressed as a Jedi if he felt that the Jedi Order needed to end? The Last Jedi Visual Dictionary says Luke only wears those robes to go through one final Jedi rite. The Last Jedi novelization says that Luke has tried to burn down the Jedi library multiple times but couldn't bring himself to go through with it. The book also states that Rey interrupted one of his attempts, which is why he was wearing the robes at the start of the movie. I think Luke's intent was to burn down the tree and also become one with the Force. I think that was the final Jedi rite he planned to undergo, which would have ended the Jedi line as he wanted, but there was probably some nagging feeling that always stopped him because deep down he knew it wasn't the right path. What relics does Luke have in his hut? I'm sure he had several, but two are given more attention. The first is a Jedi Crusader pendant that held part of a Sith lightsaber crystal as a trophy. Jedi Crusaders were first mentioned in Legends in the Old Republic era as a group of renegade Jedi who followed Revan when he was still a Jedi Knight in his campaign against Mandalorian conquerors. The other relic was a star compass Luke recovered from one of Emperor Palpatine's vaults on the planet Pilio, which we can see in Battlefront 2. It's been referred to as the Jedi version of a Sith Wayfinder. The compass is at least partially responsible for Luke's ability to find Ahch-To in the first Jedi Temple. It's also cool to note that the relic was developed for the video game, sketched out by Dave Filoni, quickly created by the prop department, and then sent over to Rian Johnson to be included in the film, all within a week.
You were unbalanced.
What do we know about Snoke's history? He was the result of genetic experiments from Palpatine's DNA, basically like a non-identical clone called a strand cast. He was meant to be a vessel for Darth Sidious's spirit to inhabit, but the Emperor rejected the body and instead decided to use Snoke as a puppet. Maybe quite literally. It's unclear right now if Snoke had any autonomy of his own. Palpatine claims that he was the voice of Snoke to Kylo Ren, but also talks about manipulating Snoke in other sources. At some point, Snoke revealed himself to the Imperial Remnant and eliminated their leaders until he was the best option left to follow, and so they became the First Order. He also appeared to Luke Skywalker and Ben Solo as an ally in the Force for a time, but Skywalker eventually realized the deception, they fought, and Snoke was injured. Again, it's unclear what those injuries were, because Snoke's clones look like they were created to be disfigured. Either way, Snoke's time with the Jedi began to twist Ben Solo's heart, who still saw the mysterious figure as a mentor and sought him out immediately after destroying Luke's training temple. Who are Snoke's purple-robed attendants? They were navigators known especially for their skills charting the unknown regions where the First Order originated in the decades after the fall of the Galactic Empire. During the time of the Clone Wars, they could be seen in the service of several factions that lived in the unknown regions, including the Grisk, brutal invaders and rivals to the Chiss Ascendancy. The members of the Empire that fled into the unknown regions after the Battle of Jakku only survived thanks to hyperspace paths created by the attendants.
I know this place.
What is the Jedi Library Tree? It was a Uneti tree, a very rare kind of tree that was strong in the Force, at least for a tree. If you've seen the Clone Wars series, you've actually seen a Uneti tree before, standing in the courtyard of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. That tree was sadly uprooted after the rise of the Empire, but 2 pieces of it were preserved in an Imperial vault. After the Battle of Endor, Luke recovered both and gave one of the pieces to Poe Dameron's mother, who planted it near her home on Yavin 4. The staff of Chirrut Imwe in Rogue One was also made out of Uneti wood. The trees supposedly originated on Ahch-To, and Luke Skywalker's study of their saplings helped him find the first Jedi Temple along with the star compass he recovered on Pilio.
The original Jedi texts.
What do we know about the sacred Jedi texts? Not a whole lot, but we do know that Luke collected them during his travels after Return of the Jedi and eventually brought them to Ahch-To. The 2 volumes of the Aeonomica contained handwritten notes and letters about some of the earliest explorations of the Force. The Chronicles of Brusbu wound up containing information on healing kyber crystals, which Rey would use to repair the broken Skywalker lightsaber. The Ramagon contained several conflicting mythological origin stories of the Jedi Order and was discovered by Luke in ruins on Ossus, where he started his own Jedi Academy. And we know one of the other titles was Poetics of a Jedi. What is the significance of Leia's ring? Ready to be sad? It's Han and Leia's wedding ring. In the book The Princess and the Scoundrel, we see the Ewoks create simple but beautiful rings out of vines and gold amber for each of them to wear, but they were fragile and they break during the adventure in that story. So Han designed a more permanent ring. The gold was a reminder of their original rings, and the 2 stones were meant to symbolize the 2 of them. I love that even though Han and Leia separate after their sons fall to the dark side, Leia never removes the ring. There was a distance between them, but they never fell out of love.
They've tracked us through lightspeed.
How does hyperspace tracking work? We know the Galactic Empire began research on the technology thanks to Jyn Erso's line in Rogue One while she was reading out a list of their secret projects. According to the Last Jedi Visual Dictionary, the Supremacy doesn't track the Resistance fleet the same way a homing beacon would. Instead, it's basically a probability calculator. A huge array of databanks and computers on the Mega-class Star Destroyer was able to calculate a target's trajectory and all possible destinations within a matter of minutes. The ship would then jump to what the computer claimed was the most likely result, so it doesn't sound like a completely foolproof system, but it was a reliable one. How does Leia survive in the vacuum of space? First and foremost, we have to understand that Star Wars has never fully operated under real-world physics. I would consider being sucked into the vacuum of space fatal in Star Wars, but I'm also willing to give it some leeway. Other Star Wars stories, especially in Legends, have shown us Force users creating protective barriers around themselves that could aid in her survival. Even if she didn't specifically know how to use them, we've seen several canon stories like Leia, Princess of Alderaan, or Bloodline, where Leia accesses the Force in a fight-or-flight scenario. And we now know that she did train with Luke for a time. But mostly, I think it comes down to the vacuum of space being just a little bit less lethal in Star Wars. We've seen plenty of other examples of characters taking spacewalks and surviving, or simply wearing helmets in environments that probably should have killed them.
Well, keep up the barrage.
How does the Raddus outpace the Supremacy? While Star Wars often asks us to suspend our sense of disbelief when it comes to real science, the Raddus fleeing the First Order actually does work with real-world physics. Since the Resistance ships are much smaller than the First Order Star Destroyers, they are able to accelerate faster. While they have fuel, they are able to increase the distance between them and their enemies. Of course, once they run out of fuel, their acceleration stops, and the First Order is able to catch up, picking off one ship at a time. But objects with smaller mass can accelerate faster than objects with a larger mass, so the Resistance ships can get out of immediate danger, they just can't fully escape. Did Chewbacca eat that porg? We don't know for sure. There aren't any sources I could find that confirmed whether or not he went through with his dinner, but I assume that he did. He just felt a little guilty about it. He had already cooked 2 porgs. To me, it would have been more disrespectful to not eat them. Wookiees are known for being in tune with nature, even the ones that aren't classically Force sensitive. To them, hunting to survive is a part of the circle of life. So I think Chewie likely ate the 2 porgs he cooked, was grateful for the nourishment they provided, and then probably felt too guilty to eat any more of them. What is the significance of Han's gold dice? They once belonged to Han's father before passing to him, and they became a good luck charm for the scrum rat on Corellia. Star Wars legends established that Han eventually used them to win the Millennium Falcon from Lando. Canon reference books continued that trend, stating they were used in a variant of sabacc called Corellian Spike. We didn't see that happen in Solo: A Star Wars Story, we only saw the very end of that game, but I think we can assume the dice were used earlier. Basically, they're just a good luck charm, but behind the scenes, they first appeared way back in A New Hope, only visible in one scene. Their legend grew in the old Marvel comics and the trading card games, so the dice gained some notoriety with diehard fans. They were originally going to be included in The Force Awakens, showing Han returning his dice to their rightful place on the Millennium Falcon, but the scene was cut. The Last Jedi made the dice a reminder of Han Solo after his death for Luke, Leia, and Kylo Ren, and then Solo: A Star Wars Story put them front and center once again.
So, what's our plan?
Why didn't Vice Admiral Holdo tell Poe the plan? I can think of some reasons for this, but I do think the entire plot on the Raddus could have been written more clearly to better serve the movie. For example, the First Order was tracking the Resistance through hyperspace, something they all believed to be impossible. It makes complete sense that they might think there was a physical tracker on one of the ships or even a spy within the Resistance. That's reason enough for Holdo to keep her plan quiet, but when the audience knows that's not the case and no other narrative reason is given, I agree that it feels frustrating to watch. That said, I do have to point out that the second Poe learns what the plan is, he is the one to blab about it on speakerphone, giving it away to DJ. So while I understand Holdo's reasoning, I do think giving her a more obviously stated reason when she first took control of the fleet would have benefited that part of the movie. What is the mosaic on the floor of the first Jedi Temple? It's meant to represent the Prime Jedi, considered to be the first Jedi to learn to use the Force around 25,000 years before the events of the Star Wars films. It's currently unknown if this is meant to be a literal depiction of the Prime Jedi. I think the Prime Jedi could wind up being a collection of people instead of just one person, and the mosaic could be metaphorical. We simply don't know enough right now, but James Mangold's planned movie about the Dawn of the Jedi seems likely to explore those ideas.
I took him and began the training temple.
Where was Luke's training temple? That was a mystery for quite a while until the novel Shadow of the Sith by Adam Christopher. We briefly visit Luke's training academy in that story, and the planet is stated to be Ossus. Apparently, that was first established in the script notes for the Book of Boba Fett, where we see Luke constructing the first buildings for his academy, and the novel made it official. Ossus was an important planet to the Jedi in Star Wars legends, serving as its headquarters long before they built their Jedi temple on Coruscant. In canon, it was also associated with the Jedi of old and was said to be home to a great Jedi library long ago.
He had vanished with a handful of my students.
What happened to Luke's surviving students? Skywalker says when he recovered from Ben Solo's attack, his nephew and a handful of students were missing. That led some fans to believe those students could have become the Knights of Ren, but their story is told in the Rise of Kylo Ren comic by Charles Soule. 3 Padawans were off on a mission when Ben Solo destroyed Luke's temple. Ty, Vo, and Hennix all found Ben in the aftermath and drew their lightsabers on him when he claimed responsibility for what happened. He bested them and fled, but they chased him across the galaxy. Hennix died in an accident on the planet Elphrona. Ty was killed by Ren, the leader of the Knights of Ren shortly after, an act that sent Ben into a rage. He killed Ren and took control of the Knights, and then he killed Vo himself. When did Ben Solo fall to the dark side? That's hard to pinpoint, but we do know the destruction of Luke's temple took place 6 years before the events of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. That was the final nail in the coffin. That said, Snoke had already been manipulating Ben for some unknown amount of time, and it's possible young Solo had already dabbled in dealings with the First Order. The book Bloodline, which takes place before the destruction of Luke's academy, hints that Ben Solo knew of an assassination attempt on his mother's life, and he may have secretly warned her about it. So we don't know the full timeline of his fall, but we can say that he became Kylo Ren 6 years before the sequel trilogy.
Lesson 2.
What was Luke's third lesson to Rey? You can find it in a deleted scene for the film that was ultimately cut for pacing reasons. In it, Rey sees ships approaching the Caretaker's village and Luke tells her it's violent raiders, but he urges her not to defend the Caretakers and escalate the fighting because that's what the sacred Jedi texts claim a Jedi would do. Really, he's testing her character to see if she would take action. She does and runs off to save the Caretakers, finding them in the midst of a party instead. The ships were simply other members of the village returning from a fishing trip. Later, Luke tells Rey what the galaxy needs is her willingness to act regardless of the teachings of the Jedi. The lesson here isn't as straightforward as the other two, but I think Luke is saying that the dogma of the Jedi could sometimes get in the way of doing what's right. I would agree, we saw that happen in the prequel trilogy, but that doesn't mean the Jedi need to end. It simply means their teachings can and should be updated. Any institution should be willing to adapt to changing times, cultures, and beliefs.
Don't let the rapper fool you, friend.
Why was DJ in jail in The Last Jedi? That story is told in the one-shot DJ Most Wanted comic that came out around the same time as the movie. Basically, he was running a bunch of scams in the city under the alias Denel Stench. He had stolen some currency from a bunch of shady characters and then installed some sort of virus on it. He then purposefully lost it all in the casinos, and then the infected credits would pass the virus around, which would eventually give him a big payout. But all the people he scammed started looking for Denel Stench. The walls started closing in around DJ, and he basically got himself arrested so he wouldn't get killed, and prepared to leave Canto Bight as quickly as he could. How does Rey know how to swim? Okay, first of all, as Harrison Ford put it to Mark Hamill almost 50 years ago,
It ain't that kind of movie.
the scenes in the Mirror Cave are all about myth and symbolism. Rey's plunge into the water is more about a metaphorical baptism and coming change, reinforced by her hair changing as well. But she grew up surrounded by sand. How does she know how to swim? Who cares? It doesn't matter. But with that out of the way, I do have some in-universe answers. First, I don't think she does know how to swim. Not very well, anyway. She falls in the water, flails about, is able to make it to the surface, and to me, it looks like she ineffectively splashes her way to the shore. Second, Rey wasn't born on Jakku. According to the novel Shadow of the Sith, she was born on the forest planet Hypercarn. It's completely reasonable that as a young child, she could have learned to swim at least well enough to not drown. What does the vision in the Mirror Cave mean? Just like Luke's vision in the Darkside Cave on Dagobah, I think this is fully up to the interpretation of the viewer. I think this Darkside Cave wanted to make Rey feel alone and wanted to drive her closer to Kylo Ren and eventually Snoke, but it did so by telling her the truth. The long line of Reys could represent every version of herself she could become, the infinite possibilities of the future. She goes deeper to try to see where the line ends, what her future could be, and she once again seeks identity through her parents, begging to see them. She sees two figures that become one, and it's revealed to simply be her. As Kylo Ren tells her, she looks for father figures in Han Solo and Luke Skywalker. She keeps looking to other people, maybe wanting them to just tell her what to do and what is right. But the mirror is saying, no, you have to decide who you are for yourself. You never had parents to guide you before, and you don't need them now. From one point of view, I think that's an empowering message, but from Rey's point of view, it compounds the loneliness she has always always felt and was feeling intensely on Ahch-To. That's what I get from the scene, but I'd love to hear your own interpretations in the comments. How could the same person who saw good in Darth Vader ignite his lightsaber against his nephew? Yes, it's true that in Return of the Jedi, Luke Skywalker told Obi-Wan Kenobi that he couldn't kill his own father, and he continued to refuse to fight Anakin Skywalker. But those scenes in the Emperor's throne room show Luke bouncing back and forth between violence and peace, until Vader threatens someone Luke loves, Leia. Then Luke loses his mind and just starts wailing on his own father and very nearly does kill him. We can follow that same line of thinking in The Last Jedi. Luke saw a possible future in Ben's mind: pain, destruction, death, and the end of everything Luke loved. We've also seen that visions in the Force can appear to be very real, so in a single second of a shameful act, he ignited his lightsaber, in a moment that is directly mirroring the same shot where Luke almost killed Vader. This is one of Luke's biggest flaws. We see it in The Empire Strikes Back as well, sensing danger for his friends and running off to face it before he's ready. We also see that he repeats another mistake from Dagobah. What's in the dark side cave? Only what you take with you. If you're bringing your weapons into the cave, you're basically looking for something to fight. Why did Luke even bring his lightsaber into Ben's hut? He wasn't planning to draw it on his nephew, but bringing a lightsaber along to me says subconsciously Luke's mind was made up. He already thought Ben was dangerous. Why did Ben Solo have a calligraphy set? It's visible in a blink and you'll miss it moment, but the Last Jedi Visual Dictionary makes specific mention of the set, and the reference book 100 Objects by Kristen Baver builds on it. The set once belonged to Obi-Wan Kenobi, was recovered from his hut by Luke, and given to Ben Solo as a gift. The reason it's important is because of the book Bloodline by Claudia Gray. Rian Johnson gave some creative insight to the author, since the book connected to The Last Jedi. That story is about Leia's final days in the New Republic Senate, about 6 years before the sequel trilogy. In it, she is warned of an assassination attempt thanks to a handwritten note, a rare sight in the Star Wars galaxy. Although it is not confirmed, I think it's likely her son knew of the plot and discreetly saved his mother's life.
Someone needs to stay behind and pilot the cruiser.
When did Leia Organa meet Amilyn Holdo? It's clear they have a history together, even if we don't see it in The Last Jedi. They met in the book Leia, Princess of Alderaan by Claudia Gray, which takes place when Leia is 16 years old, first entering the Imperial Apprentice Legislature to train to enter the Galactic Senate. Amilyn was another member of the program, known for her rebellious streak. The two young women developed a friendship that continued for years. Before the Battle of Yavin, they were companions on Coruscant, but as war with the Empire loomed closer, Holdo joined Leia in the rebellion, becoming a spy for the Alliance.
Fire on that cruiser!
Why wasn't the Holdo Maneuver used more frequently? The Last Jedi novelization by Jason Fry goes into a lot of details about how the Raddus' experimental shields were actually responsible for most of the damage from the Holdo Maneuver in The Last Jedi. I also don't think she necessarily knew what would happen when she entered hyperspace. I think she was acting out of desperation to save the rest of the Resistance. As Finn says later in The Rise of Skywalker, it was a 1 in a million shot. It's not a strategy that can be dependably relied upon because there's no guarantee it'll work. I think it's silly to say that and then show it happening later in the exact same movie, but that's a topic for another time. Despite it being established as a near-impossible maneuver to replicate, fans have wondered why we haven't seen it happen before. But we have. In the Star Wars Legends comic Dark Empire 2, the resurrected Emperor uses a superweapon called the Galaxy Gun that weaponized hyperspace to a degree, and he said, "Marvelous, it's a wonder we didn't think of it decades ago." I know the Galaxy Gun didn't work exactly like a bunch of Holdo maneuvers, but my point is that someone had to be the first to successfully do something like this. Maybe it had been attempted before and failed, but now people can study what Holdo did and crack the case. The fact of the matter is, we know very little about how hyperspace even works. I assume there is a reason people don't go around ramming things at light speed willy-nilly, even if I don't know what that specific reason is.
The mineral planet Crait, an uncharted hideout from the days of the rebellion.
What was the rebellion's history on Crait? It was used as a base before the Rebel Alliance was even officially formed. 3 years before the Battle of Yavin, when Leia Organa was 16, she investigated rebel activity and tracked it back to Crait, where she was surprised to find her father in charge, which sparked her own involvement with the rebellion. The base there was abandoned shortly after, but was revisited by Leia when the Rebel Alliance needed a new secret base. Despite their victory in the Battle of Yavin, the Rebels had to flee Yavin 4, and Crait was floated as a possible new home. They went so far as to begin digging trenches and establishing defenses, but their location was betrayed by a miner on the planet, and the Empire sent the Rebel Alliance on the run once more. The Resistance would later return to those defenses over 3 decades later.
What happened?
How did Rey get back to the Millennium Falcon? As Hux tells Kylo Ren, she got away in Snoke's personal escape craft that must have been located nearby the throne room. She then waited in space for Chewbacca to pick her up in the Millennium Falcon. But the Last Jedi novelization also tells us that she had a moment where she considered killing an unconscious Kylo Ren. Obviously, she rejects that idea, even though she knows one quick yet dark act had the potential to save countless lives. But she knew the Force wasn't finished with him, and of course he wound up playing a role in the fight against Palpatine a year later. What happened to all the porgs on the Millennium Falcon? Don't worry, they're all fine, and we know that thanks to the book Pirate's Price, the Star Wars Adventures comics, Galaxy's Edge, and Tales from the Galaxy's Edge. Basically, when the Resistance set up a base on Batuu and the Millennium Falcon was parked in Black Spire Outpost, all the Porg stowaways began to thrive on the new world. 2 of them became companions of the pirate Hondo Ohnaka, who named them Puffy and Snappy. The Porgs on Batuu reproduced and began living in the cliffs of the planet, which were somewhat similar to their natural habitat on Ahch-To. Some were domesticated and sold as pets in the market, and a drink was named after the critters in Oga's cantina.
Our distress signal's been received at multiple points, but no response.
Why didn't any Resistance allies answer the call to help at the Battle of Crait? The Rise of Skywalker novelization explains that it wasn't simply a matter of losing hope, as Leia fears in The Last Jedi. On Kijimi, Poe confides in Zori Bliss that he's afraid no one even heard their message. One of the First Order's priorities after the destruction of the New Republic Senate was shutting down communications, especially to planets friendly to the Resistance. Poe knows for a fact that the First Order had been jamming their transmissions, but he did also fear that the galaxy had truly given up hope. Why didn't Luke use his green lightsaber in his Force projection? Rian Johnson says it was to get a rise out of Kylo Ren since he felt that the blue lightsaber belonged to him. It was also a signal that something wasn't quite right with Luke's appearance on Crait. But I'm also going to add my own reasoning to this. So much of the Force is about visualization and belief. Yoda says as much in The Empire Strikes Back. Luke is trying to manifest himself as the vision of an absolute Jedi hero, but the green lightsaber is a symbol of one of his most shameful moments, igniting it in his nephew's hut. Even though using the green lightsaber would have made more sense, considering we didn't just see it break in half, I suspect Luke may not have been able to make a convincing projection if he himself didn't fully believe it. We also don't know exactly how this works. He may not have chosen all the specific details of his projection's appearance. It could just be happening based on his own thoughts and feelings. My point is, I think when Luke envisions the most heroic version of himself, it probably doesn't include the green lightsaber that helped create Kylo Ren.
See you around, kid.
Why did Luke's Force projection cause his death? Force projection, also known as doppelganger or simul-futurist, first appeared in Star Wars Legends and was expanded upon by Force users called the Falanasi. They were known for first achieving Force projection, which required the user to pour their life essence into the cosmic Force, which is the aspect of the Force which makes Force ghosts possible. In a sense, creating a Force projection was very similar to the way a Jedi who had become one with the Force would be able to create a physical manifestation of their consciousness. Creating a projection would not result in death for any user, but the further the distance, the more realistic the doppelganger, and the longer it was projected all factored into the difficulty of the technique, and therefore how much of a being's life essence would be given up to the cosmic Force itself. Why does Luke's robotic hand become one with the Force? It was cybernetic, so why does it disappear with the rest of his body? It disappears for the same reason most of Obi-Wan's robes disappear when he becomes one with the Force. That hand was a part of Luke, cybernetic or not. He could and did use the Force with it. Luke had to accept the new hand as part of himself. I see no reason why it would have to be left behind. But ultimately, this all came down to a filmmaking decision. On Twitter, Rian Johnson said, "In the edit room, someone joke suggested that when he fades away, his robot hand should clank down onto the rock, but it might have undercut the moment." What happened to Luke's green lightsaber? According to the novelization of The Last Jedi by Jason Fry, Luke brought the weapon to Ahch-To all those years ago. We don't know where he kept it, but the caretakers of the island cleaned out his hut after he became one with the Force. They packed up his robes, various artifacts, and the book specifies they also collected his weapon, taking them all to a repository where other such items were held from the various Jedi that lived on or visited the first Jedi Temple over the course of tens of thousands of years. So Luke's green lightsaber is still on Ahch-To somewhere, waiting to be discovered. Luke Skywalker. How does Luke's story spread across the galaxy? I'm speculating here, but I think the answer can be found in the Poe Dameron comics by Charles Soule. Leading up to the events of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, Poe was approached by an old friend from the New Republic Navy named Suralinda Javos. She had left the military to become a journalist and attempted to learn the location of the Resistance base. But the closer she got to the Resistance, the more she began to believe in their cause, and she eventually joined Black Squadron. She was with the rest of the pilots during the events of The Last Jedi, failing to gather allies for the Resistance. After learning about the Battle of Crait, I believe she could have used her contacts as a journalist to help spread the legend of Luke Skywalker, which is something the book Resistance Reborn hints at as a possibility.
Happy beats here, buddy. Come on.
Who says, "I've got a bad feeling about this" in The Last Jedi? It's a line that's appeared in every Star Wars movie in some form or fashion, and yes, I include Han Solo saying he has a good feeling about this in Solo: A Star Wars Story. But where is it in The Last Jedi? It's one of the very first lines in the movie. It just wasn't delivered in BASIC. It was delivered in binary by BB-8, and I love that. You can still understand the line given the context of the scene, but it isn't an overt inclusion forced into the script because it's supposed to be there. But that brings us to the end of the 40 most frequently asked questions I've seen about The Last Jedi. If you liked this video, check out the ones I've already done answering questions for the original and prequel trilogies and The Force Awakens, and I'm working on The Rise of Skywalker right now. Make sure you catch it by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, following us on our socials, and please consider checking out our Patreon page for even more Star Wars talk. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.